Okay, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Pawtucket School Committee meeting on Tuesday, January 12th at 6:33 p.m. Ms. List, please take a roll call.
Ms. Spinolo.
Here.
Ms. Doobie.
Here. Sorry.
Ms. Grant.
Here.
Mr. Knight.
Here.
Mr. Larby.
Here.
Mr. Marino.
Here.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Here, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone. All right, we will go to public participation. Miss, I would you to take the folks from public participation in the order that we received them, or which order you have them in is fine. And I would ask that we allow Mr. Cristino a minute or two to find those folks in the audience so that everyone can be heard on this. Ms. Liss?
The first request was received from Mr. Eric Aslin.
Okay, I will allow Mr. Aslin in right now. Mr. Aslin, you can talk.
Mr.
Connection
Aslin,
good? Okay. Hold on one second. Good evening, members of the committee, Chairman Charbonneau and Dr. McWilliams. I'm here to provide testimony on why we should not be going back to school at this time. In early August, before the state decided how they would handle reopening of schools, I decided to have major surgery. This was a surgery that I could have put off for a couple more years, but I chose to have the surgery now because I have no confidence, or had no confidence, that our political leaders from Washington down to the state level would handle the situation correctly. Just by looking at the numbers, I was proven right. Throughout this, however, was one success story, and that is the city of Pawtucket. Despite all the political pressure from the governor, we have done the right thing. Cases have been consistently far lower than our neighbors in Central Falls and Providence, whose faculty and students have no say and are full in school because they are state-controlled, meaning control. While I work in Pawtucket, I live in Cranston. Although very close in population size, Cranston is far larger in land area and overall a significantly higher standard of living here. You would think, especially if you lived in Western Cranston, that no way cases would be comparable to Pawtucket. This is not the case. Looking back to before most districts went distance before Christmas break, Cranston repeatedly had more cases than Pawtucket. What's the difference? Pawtucket stayed DL while Cranston was going hybrid. Some of the stories I heard from neighbors of the disruption of their lives because suddenly their child had to quarantine for 14 days because of a positive case in their class. One neighbor told me their daughter having a panic attack due to the mask, wearing the mask, rightfully, combined with the anxiety of taking a test. Students are kept in one class all day, away from their friends. They can't work in groups. They rightfully need to wear a mask all day. Are we just trying to house children or educate them? It's important to also understand we're only as strong as our weakest link. If we go in, parents might have to choose between sending their sick child to school because they need to go to work because they have no sick time and just started a job because now they thought their child would be in school. We witnessed the breakdown in stable pods as sick teachers are out and their students are split into other classes because subs don't come in just like they don't come in other districts. I'd like to close with this. Just the optics of making the decision of reopening schools just days removed from the news that we have the second highest infection rate in the world, just a month removed from having the highest death rate in the world. This is the darkest time of this pandemic. We're just now in the beginning stages of rolling out the vaccine. Now is not the time to fully reopen schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aslin. Ms. Liss?
Next is Mr. Joe Braun.
Hello, can you hear me?
Good evening, Mr. Braun.
Can you hear me, please?
We can.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Hello, committee members and Dr. McWilliams. I wanted to start by thanking Dr. McWilliams for presenting her plan to begin a phased return to in-person learning for PSD students at the last meeting. I really applaud this effort and think that this is a step in the right direction. And despite the ongoing pandemic and being in some of the darkest days right now, I believe that there are several reasons to be optimistic that we can safely and responsibly reopen schools. As the last speaker noted, we're now administering the vaccine to essential healthcare workers in the most vulnerable populations in our state. And the most recent CDC guidelines are recommending that teachers and school staff be included in the next wave of vaccinations. In fact, Rhode Island has administered 42% of the vaccines they've been provided to date, and this is well above the national average of 30%. Second, there are several new studies that indicate that in-person learning does not appreciably increase the risk of COVID among students, teachers, or communities. In one study from North Carolina, there was extremely limited within-school secondary transmission of COVID among 11 school districts with over 90,000 students and staff. And there was no evidence of child to adult transmission, which is consistent with much of the data that we've observed to date. In another study from Sweden, there was no evidence that in-person learning was little evidence that in-person learning was associated with severe COVID or COVID-related deaths. And in fact, there were no deaths associated with COVID, and any severe COVID-related symptoms were observed in less than 1 in 100,000 children aged 1 to 16 years. And finally, there is increasing evidence that school reopenings do not drive community transmission. And in fact, in some cases, there's evidence that school reopenings may actually reduce community transmission by providing safe and stable environments for children and increasing the compliance with social distancing and mask wearing measurements. And I'm happy to provide any of these references as well as PDF copies of peer-reviewed papers on this subject. The third thing is that we know that we can reduce the risk of disease transmission in schools with mitigation techniques, including mask wearing, additional hygiene practices, increased ventilation, and air filtration. My colleagues at the Harvard School of Public Health have published extensive guidelines on how to safely reopen schools and keep them open to ensure safety of the students and children, as well as staff. We know that in-person learning is the optimal environment for children. On the last call, there was concerns over other districts' experiences with in-person learning. And I think that the committee needs to take an honest look at the experiences of our children and of our parents in the Pawtucket community, particularly that those are most at risk of falling behind because they lack supervision or resources to do the remote learning, as well as parents and essential workers who are now tasked with educating their children as well as working. And given that over 70% of the Pawtucket parents previously indicated their desire to return for in-person learning, I think it's time for the committee to represent the interests of their constituents who voted them into office. And indeed, there appears to be little reason to delay now that that most of the concerns that were raised by the committee in response to the state's requirements have been addressed. And I believe that we can resume in-person learning for our youngest learners first and begin in phased reopening now. And I'm convinced that this is necessary in order to optimize the education of Pawtucket school children's learning and ensure that they achieve their full potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braun. Ms. Liss. Mr. Knight?
I believe that one of the things that Mr. Braun did bring up was 70% of the parents in this district chose to go back to school. I believe that's an incorrect statement. I believe it's at the most 50% at this time by a survey we took. Just wanted to correct that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Ms. Liss?
The next person is Ms. Evie Robinson.
Mr. Chair, I'm looking for the next two, but I'm having a difficulty finding them listed.
Okay, Ms. Liss, are they the last two?
Yes, they are.
All right, we will give them, Mr. Cristino, a minute or two to see if he can locate the remaining two speakers for public participation.
Mr. Cristino, I do see an Amanda Robinson on. I know Robinson is a common last name. Is there a possibility that they are signed in under a different name?
Yeah, that's what I'm checking for. I'm just checking a couple of things here.
Attorney Conley, from a open meetings perspective, is there a time that we can wait, or can we have these folks join and speak to their public participation points during our discussion?
So, Mr. Chairman, if under the executive orders, there's been no specific times set for these kinds of situations. But if you have people signed in and there's technical difficulties, and those technical difficulties are resolved at another point in the meeting, you can allow them in to address you at that time.
All right. It is just now 6:45. I am willing, we can wait another literally 2 or 3 minutes.
Ms. Liss, if possible, if you had the email, if you could ask the two people, maybe they could let me know how they're displayed on the screen, then I'd be able to find them a little quicker.
Yes, I will do that right now.
Thank you.
All right, it is 6:47. We will continue with the meeting. If Mr. Cristino is able to locate both of those folks, we'll pause the meeting, we'll have them speak to their public participation point, and then we'll continue.
Mr. Chairman, I noticed a Shannon here with the hands up, and that could be the person. You could ask her for a name, same spelling.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good, because I didn't know how I could communicate with you guys. Thank you so much for me to have this time to speak to you. My name's Shannon, and my son Alan goes to Shea High School. I'm really concerned about him. He really needs to go back to school. I can't let you guys know how much that this has affected him. He's gained so much weight. He's giving up on school because the distance learning is not good for him. It's not the same. He does have an IEP, but I was told that there wasn't really a classroom for him in the most valuable, most vulnerable persons. And I'm starting to get frustrated and angry because I feel like I understand why we're keeping schools closed. I understand we have a plan to open back up, but I feel at this point, and as far as my experience with my son, that it's kind of like trading lives almost here. You know, he used to walk to school every single day. This is his second year in a regular ed place. He was in therapeutic before, and I wanted to stress so much on how the need for him to go back to school. Mental health wise, there's all other parts of things that go into this, not just health wise with COVID too. And I just wanted to advocate about that and what the quality of the education that I see him receiving online compared to in person. It's just not a good fit at all. I don't know, and those were the concerns I really wanted to bring to the table. That there's more to it here that's suffering other than the medical piece, and you're considering of bringing kids back. And I'm just really concerned for him, and I really feel he needs to get back to in person. And I thank you for the time that you've given me.
Thank you. Miss List, has anyone else signed up?
We're just waiting on Ms. Evie Robinson. Ms. Washburn was the last speaker. I emailed her, but I haven't received a response.
I think we can move on at this time, Mr. Chairman.
I do have a question for Attorney Conley. I'm in receipt of, let's see, of a text message asking how they can, a member in the audience can sign up for public participation. Are we able to have someone participate who hasn't signed up prior?
Mr. Chairman, our rules specifically require that persons wishing to speak must sign in with the chair before speaking by emailing their request, and it identifies the emailing address prior to the commencement of the meeting. So our rules are very explicit. You would need unanimous consent to depart from the rules. And then if you do that, you will need to allow anyone else who didn't comply with the rules of participation to participate at that point.
Thank you. All right. On that advice, we will move on to old business, school reopening plan review modification. Superintendent McWilliams?
Yes, good evening, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity to share the data that we did conduct a couple of surveys. Thank you, Mr. Christino. You can put that up. So the surveys that we conducted, we started right before the holiday break, and we wanted to ensure that we had the most up-to-date data. So once we did not get, a number of responses that we were looking for, we wanted to make sure that we had as much of a full participation as we could get. We started having the schools call individual families. So if you go, if we go first, if you just go to the next slide, District-wide, we had a 76.4% response rate and a 23.6 of a no response rate. And I do want to note that the 23% of a no response at this time, right up until earlier today, as you can see, the time on this slide indicates that we continue to reach out to those families, schools reached out to those families. So this is as live and current as data as you can get. And a large portion of that 23.6% is secondary. And I will say that in the past, when we've done surveys, it's, you know, of course, we want to make sure that we get as much information from our secondaries as well as we do our elementary. But typically, we do always get a larger response from our elementary. So the elementary response is over 80%, which we feel is a very good read on what our families would like to see. So what I'd like to do, this is a pretty extensive data collection as we did it by district and then also by grade level and then also by school. So what I'd like to do is just go over the district-wide and then go right into the school by grade, because we have that not only as the hard raw data, but also as percentages. I will say, Hirsch, thank you. If you go to the next slide, district-wide, if you do the math, you will find overall, I think it was mentioned by one of the school committee members earlier on after public comment, that this newer data shows about a 55-45 split district-wide. So I know we did, in the 70% that's been floating out there was accurate as of the summertime when we did that initial survey, but we are seeing, you know, a different response at this time. And of course, I would suspect that that's related to the conditions of the community spread of the virus at this time, which is, I believe, up to 21%. And back then it was probably 1 or 2%. But with that being said, I would also like to say that you have to really consider the different grade levels, the different, in the specific grades. So although it's 55-45 district-wide, when we actually get into each individual school by grade, you will see some of the differences there. So Hirsch, if we could go to right to the selection by grade by school, which has the raw data and the percent data. I believe that slide starts with Baldwin selection by grade. I believe it's slide 16. I think that will give us a good overview. So I think this will give us a good overview starting with elementary. So if you look on the left-hand side, you will see the raw data of the numbers by grade, and then you will see the percentage by grade. So Baldwin has, as you can see, 54% indicating that they would like an in-person return, while 31, close to 32% on distance learning, with a 14.29% of not responding at this time. We have not received a response of those individual families. I will tell you that because we did this survey in Skyward and through a call center, we actually know the families that did not respond. So the schools have an Excel spreadsheet with every student's name and family and their contact information as to who did not respond. And we continue, and we will continue to reach out to them so that, you know, we do get their response. So this is by grade level. This is Baldwin. So you can see first grade, and then you can see second grade. It goes right on, and you can see where it falls. You know, like look at the fifth grade, 31% of the fifth grade, or almost 32, because it's 31.97. The fifth grade at Baldwin, they prefer 32% is saying in person, while 52% are saying on distance learning. So when you really look at the data, it's really important to look at it by school and by grade level. If you could go on to the next slide, let's go on to, thank you, Cunningham. Cunningham, on the left-hand side, you'll see the raw data. So, you know, like grade 1, for an example, there are 68 students in grade 1, and they heard from all but one, pretty much almost one family, which that's really good data. When you go over to the second set of column data, you will see Baldwin's first grade, 55% requesting in person, 44% distance learning, and then so on and so forth. Per grade level, you can see there's a little bit of a fluctuation. So when we say overall, you look at the data, it's that it really does come out to be that 55/45%, which you know is interesting, and I think again consistent with where we are. I think one of the speakers in public participation did mention where we are in the darkest hour. So let's go on to Curtis. I believe Curtis is next. So Curtis, you can look again at the 40-40 split, but we have not heard from about 18% of their families in grade 1, 22% in grade 2, and so on. So again, we're still reaching out to them. But again, you can see, look at grade 4. Grade 4 at Curtis, 56% want distance learning, while only 21% are indicating they want in person. Of course, we're still waiting on 21% response. And let's go on. I want to move a little bit, you know, it's very extensive. Curve and McCabe. So Curve and McCabe, look at grade 1, it's almost an equal split, but look at grade 2, 60% wanting in person, 39% distance learning. And then you go over to grade 5, 45% wanting in person, 52% wanting distance learning. So again, it's pretty consistent in the state that the overall so far is 55-45. And let's go on. Fallon. So Fallon, again, you can see on the screen, grades 1, a 47 in person to a 41 distance learning. We haven't heard from 10% of their families, and pretty consistent between 10 and 19%. We're still trying to gain that information, but you can see, you know, even the little bit of discrepancies in the grades. So grade 4 at Fallon is 54% wanting in person, while 32% on distance learning, with 13% still we haven't heard from. And grade 5 is, you know, more of a 46% in person and 34% on distance learning. And let's go on to Green. So Green, you have grade 1 percentage, 31.15% wanting distance learning, 60% wanting in person. Green has a little bit more of a spread, as you can see, by grade level, you know, leaning more towards the in-person. And we can go on. Now, it's interesting to know, you can stay on that slide, but I just wanted to mention this because it just hit me now as I looked at it again, and I want to see where Potter falls on this, because don't forget, we already had in-person at Green, Potter, Jenks, and Barrier. So I wonder if that weighs into it at all. But Agnes Little, so grade 1, you can see there's a 29, almost a 30% distance learning and a 46% in person. Grade 2, not too much of a discrepancy there. Grade 3 is interesting, 45% wanting distance learning and 29% in person. Again, to note that we haven't heard from 24% of that particular grade. Again, look at grade 4. Grade 4, 42% wanting in person, 22% wanting distance learning, but we haven't heard from 34% of those families. And then grade 5, they lean more towards distance learning with, again, 23% not hearing from those families. So let's go on to the next school, Potter Burns. So I was interested in seeing this. Of course,
I apologize for interrupting. Mr. Cristino, can you check? I'm being told that there's a hand raised out there from Miss Robinson, and she had signed up for public participation. I want to make sure she's got the chance to be heard.
I also
I
see
do,
that right
yes.
at the top.
She just joined. Would you like me to bring her in now?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll bring her in right now.
I'm sorry, Ms. Dewey, what was that?
I was just saying I saw her hand.
Hi,
Can
can
you-
you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for hearing my comment. I apologize profusely for being late. As usual, it is a tech issue in the world of the pandemic. My name is Evie Robinson, and I have 2 students who go to Potter Burns. I'm also a teacher, and I've been in Pawtucket for the last 6 years. And I just wanted to say thank you to the staff at Potter Burns for the amazing job that they have done during this insane time in taking care of our students and in pivoting from in-person learning to online learning to in-person learning and then back to online learning again. I would also like to shout out our school committee for standing up for our staff and students when the governor of our state said that we were doing a shameful job and we were letting our students down, because that's absolutely not true. I have a very brief comment to make besides that, and it's that I'm very concerned that even though there are a lot of hardships in our city right now with the pandemic, that our infection rate in Rhode Island is at 21%, and that's the highest it's been since March. The very fact that we have to have this meeting on Zoom is an indicator that we are not ready to open our schools. And I understand we have PPE, I understand there have been updates, but there are still staff members and family members and students that are at high risk, and switching back to in-person in any way would still be keeping those family members and staff members and students at risk. To me and in our family, we believe that there isn't one small business, there isn't one job, there isn't one bill that is worth the life or the safety of one of our staff members or one of our students. And I wanted to come here tonight to say that, and also to say that it looks like with the data that it's pretty much split 50-50. And I don't envy any of you on the school committee for having to deal with this kind of a decision. When it's split 50-50, what are we going to do? You know what I mean? And to me, one of the rumors going around is that if our schools go back in person, the people who want their students to stay home will have new teachers given to their students online, and the students who go in the building might have new teachers halfway through the year. And in the pandemic, our students are already worried about everything else, and now they're going to be given a new teacher possibly halfway through the year. I mean, it just doesn't seem like there's any solution other than to be safe and count every life as more valuable than anything else and just wait for the vaccine.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. Mr. Crisino, can you also check, I'm being told Attorney Dylan Conley's hand was raised.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Okay, I do see a Dylan Conley there. Dylan is now in the meeting.
Attorney Conley? Hello, Attorney Conley.
Mr. Chairman, this is the other Attorney Conley.
Yeah.
I think that Dylan has joined in order to participate on a matter that is on the agenda later. So I apologize for the confusion.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. McWilliams?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So going back to, and thank you to all for the public participation. Going back to Potter Burns, it's interesting to look, again, when we saw Green, we saw the higher percentage of distance learning. And remember that Green was one of the schools that was already open. It looks like, you know, although, again, like I said, overall, it's a 50-45 split when you do the math, you can see that at Potter, you know, particularly in grade 5, 65, almost 66% want in person, 34% distance learning. So their numbers of in person are a little bit higher. So I think that's interesting to note. Let's go on to Varrier. So Varrier, again, looking at the percentage, the left side of the screen, just a reminder, is the raw data of the actual numbers in that grade level. And then the right side, shout out to my IT department for putting this wonderful presentation together. But the right side is the percentage. So interesting enough, look at grade 2 at Varrier. Grade 2, 66, almost 67% wanting in person, while 16% distance learning. Again, Varrier was one of those schools that has already, been open. So I do have to, ask myself if that plays into the data at all for those particular schools. And then let's go on to Winters, I believe. Winters. So Winters, interesting. My screen here. If you look at grade 1, 50% in person, 39, almost 40% distance learning, and then a shift again in grade 2. Grade kindergarten. I just wanted to know, I didn't mention kindergarten through any of those slides, but I did want to note that kindergarten, pre-K kindergarten, special populations, and our multilingual learners, prior to the pause that we took for those a couple of weeks in December and that we're in right now, that they were already in school. So on each of the schools, we did see pretty much 50-50 split of that data. And that's pretty consistent because we did have them in school, but even with kindergarten being in school, we had 8 virtual classrooms. So that's pretty consistent. But looking, overall, again, I know I went through these slides pretty quickly, but if you look overall at the grand total of the percentage of each school, you're still coming down to very, very close in all the schools, like 50, 46, 53, 47, 55, 45, at least for the elementary. So I did want to make that note. And let's go on and look at I think we have middle schools next. Middle schools, this is Goff's grade 6, 7, and 8. So you can see there are 50 total, there are 50% distance, 43, almost 44% distance learning, and a 50 to 51% in person. So that's overall. So it's staying consistent there as far as that overall percentage. But then it does, fluctuate a little bit by grade level. And let's go to Jenks. I think Jenks is next. So Jenks, we've been reaching out. Phone calls have been, going out since last week. We've left a lot of messages, and you can see there's, quite a bit of a non-response there, but we are, still working it. But even with the response, it's pretty consistent and even. So you can note that, 26, 24, grade 7 a little bit higher, 27 wanting distance learning to 20% in person. And then let's look at Slater. So again, you can see grade 6 and grade 8 have the higher percentage of non-response at this time. But if you do look at the percentage, they're really pretty close. 32, 33% wanting distance learning, 33 to 34% wanting in person for grade 6. Grade 7, it goes 43% in person, 38% distance learning. And grade 8 is almost, even. And then overall, it's a 33, 34% to a 35, 34, 35%. So it's pretty consistent, like I said, overall. Let's go up to the high school. So Shea, again, if you just look at the red and the blue, you can see a difference in grade 10. Grade 10 and grade 11, you can see they lean more towards wanting distance learning. But it's not that much of a fluctuation. But overall, I would say for the high school, the 29% overall wanting in person and 37 to 38% wanting distance learning. Again, noting that we have not heard back from all of those families. Then let's go on to Tolman. Oh, JMW next. So JMW, you can see JMW leaning more towards the in-person with their percentages. Overall, it's 43% in person to a 24 to a 25% distance learning. And then let's go on to Tolman. And Tolman, like I said, you can see the we're still working those calls, but with the responses that we have received, it's pretty even. Grade 9, it's 27 to 27%. Grade 10, 27 to 21%. So with the 21, it's leaning more towards the distance learning. Same thing, grade 11, leaning more towards the distance learning, and grade 12, pretty flat even, 22 to 22. Overall, it's a 26 preferring distance learning to a 23 in person. And let's go on. So, thank you. So what I wanted to share was just a reminder of what our reopening plans are. As we stated them back when we first started at the beginning of the school year, we had, we did present 4 plans, and you can see that I have a star at the bottom. I will go over that. But the first plan was a full in-person return. And so that would be when the conditions allow for a full in-person return where all those things have been met. And I think it was mentioned, we've answered the PPE procurement. We have, addressed the ventilation with the support of the state. We still have, some outliers to be concerned about spacing and staffing. But it all comes down to the community spread of the virus. So I think it was mentioned, full in-person probably wouldn't be the wisest at this time when we're at the highest degree of the percent of the virus. And then you have the partial return. So again, with the same contingencies of the PPE, which we have, the ventilation, which we have covered. When you look at the split of the in-person versus distance learning, you can answer some of the spacing concerns. However, that does raise and could raise some staffing concerns. But the partial would be, and I believe it was stated in some of the public participation, it would be that partial return starting off with your youngest grades and gradually entering grades. And of course, all these plans keeping with our one-to-one therapies that we have continued with. And then your third plan being the distance learning, which is what we're currently on right now. And that would be because of the significant health risks determined by the community spread of the virus. But again, we continue to do our one-to-one therapies. One of the other plans that was in the original plan from August was the limited plan, which was that hybrid plan, an AB schedule by cohort. It's, obviously it's still there in the plan, but it's probably not the most viable solution because it really lacks consistency. It raises more concerns of staffing and busing. So to me, when you look at the options, you can go to the next slide. This would be my recommendation if we are considering a plan of in-person. Obviously, we have addressed the ventilation in December into January. We've been addressing that ventilation with the air purifiers. We are working and continue to work on our staffing. If we are talking about returning to a partial return, we do need to answer that staffing. We did do a staff survey. I'll speak to that in one moment. And again, we do need to have some time to reroute busing and get our busing set. One of the things we have done is made sure that all the equipment and all the things that we had in those 4 operating schools are now back in their home school. So even though we're all on distance learning, we are set with the home schools being prepared with that ventilation and being set in a return. Now, when we look at a return, the recommendation, as you can see in my green where it says a return, the recommendation would be that we look at a PK5 in-person return starting on the 22nd. I believe that if we're looking at a return, this would be wise because it would give us the time starting tomorrow to work on addressing those families that want to still remain on distance learning, which means we have to address the staffing. And of course, we have to make sure that we get our buses routed. So that would be the recommendation. That can be done full in person on the 22nd, PK through 5, or it can be done as it was recommended to be a gradual starting with the youngest. And then while we start with those younger grades, keeping the upper grades on distance learning. And I will note that the staff survey, which I did say I'd speak to in a few minutes, but we did do a staff survey and asked the staff of the upper levels, which is the secondary 6 through 12, if you had the option, would you want to, do you think it would be wise to be on a hybrid schedule? And overwhelmingly, close to 80% of them said that no, that hybrid schedule, I'm in one day, I'm out on next, is probably not a good solution for secondary students. So I just wanted to make a note of that. But so we would want to bring them back, hopefully in March. That would be a good move. I am hopeful that, again, it was mentioned with the vaccination coming on the scene, that maybe these would be reasonable dates. I do understand that maybe they have to be shifted based on the community spread of the virus, but that would be my recommendation. And I'm just going to speak to the staffing survey. So overall, we did a staff survey. This was done in collaboration. Actually, Mr. Beaupre, the president of the PTA, and his leadership team, it's been really great working with them. The collaboration has been so good. And in a time when this is difficult, unprecedented, people use that word all the time, we're in a very, very challenging time. And what has made the difference in Pawtucket has been that collaboration, that standing together and working out solutions together. And I just can't stress that enough. So, you know, with that, Mr. Beaupre and his team and with our support of our leadership team, did a staff survey and asked them, you know, what are your thoughts? Now, we know that our staff are, they have been so great at working. I think it was stated by one of the speakers, maybe recognizing one particular school, but it's like that in every school. They are really working with their students. They are serving their populations, and they are doing a great job. And they're doing it with an excellent curriculum that we've invested in. And so with that being said, the survey wasn't, you know, will you come back or will you not come back? It was, you know, if you had to think about it, and if you had to wonder whether you feel that you're comfortable with it, what would you do? And 70% of them said, you know, with the community spread of the virus as to where we're at right now, of course, you know, they will be there on scene if they're able to. I know one particular person spoke to there might be conditions, you know, for some that have medical conditions, and that's a different story. But overwhelmingly, I'm confident that, you know, our staff would be with us, but 70% of them did say that it would, you know, they wouldn't be as comfortable returning in person, you know, due to their own concern of the community spread of the virus that we're in at this time. So with that, I hope that I've given you, Chair and school committee members, a good overview of where I believe we're at, and I turn it back to you, Chair Charbonneau.
Thank you, Superintendent. And Superintendent, can you clarify, your recommendation is a return on February 22nd? Or
so February 22nd would, it's after February vacation. So it would actually give us the appropriate time starting tomorrow to work really diligently on busing and staffing and understanding that not all of our students will be returning. So we need to answer and have support in staffing for those who still want to remain on distance learning. And I think it was also mentioned, you know, schedule changes and teacher changes. You know, that would be, I have to be honest and say that that would be something that we have to do, because we would need to make sure that we have teachers both on distance learning and in person. So yes, 22nd, I have PK through 5. That's probably, you know, a broad, ambitious. Maybe it's, I think one of the other speakers said maybe, you know, again, thinking of it gradually might be wiser, but this was, you know, it's it's there, PK through 5 on February 22nd, but I'd be happy to do that gradually and then getting our secondaries in at a later date.
All right. Any comments from Hirsch? Can you remove the sharing of the screen so we can go back and I can see if there's hands raised? Any comments from any members of the committee? Ms. Doobie.
Thank you, Superintendent, for sharing that and for sharing the data. I do want to begin by addressing something that did come up during the public communication, which was that the political rhetoric around this has been supercharged from the beginning. It has been intimated numerous times that the people sitting in these seats don't care about children or are not doing what's in the right interest of the children. I do believe that this is ripped from the same playbook that says that teachers who advocate for better working conditions are not doing what's in the right interest of children. And just like demoralizing teachers is not in the interest of children, you know, insulting whole districts is not in the interest of children. And I don't want to spend any more time on that political rhetoric. I do want to get to what I see as the two biggest kind of areas that we're talking about. The first is safety. So this was brought up. Mr. Braun was kind enough to share 3 studies with us. And the general narrative that we have heard in news articles is that the studies say it is safe to put kids back in school. So in those studies, you can read them. And for instance, one of the studies that Mr. Braun shared said, researchers found no evidence that reopening schools in person or in a hybrid form increased COVID hospitalizations. The rest of that statement says, in the counties that had low COVID hospitalization rates. In that exact same study, the co-author, Engi Zedin, says, policymakers should be cautious. It may not be safe to reopen schools where the virus is already widespread. Mr. Braun also shared a study from North Carolina. This study was conducted when cases in North Carolina were 2,000 per 10 million. For perspective, our daily cases in Rhode Island are 5 times higher than that. And finally, the Euro surveillance study that was shared, the results were obtained during low to medium community transmission. This is just me saying that it's made to sound like the headline is just, it's perfectly safe, there is no transmission. There are no studies of what reopening schools do when transmission rates are so high as they are right now, because we're leading the pack. We are the study. Rhode Island is the study. We are 2nd or 3rd in the world for transmission rates. A lot of the European examples we were looking to at the beginning and saying, oh, look, they opened schools. Britain, Germany, Ireland, Israel, they all have their schools closed right now because infection rates are approaching where they've been in Rhode Island for months. I'd just like to say that when we opened schools in Rhode Island, we had 100 new cases a day on average. We now regularly have 1,000 cases per day. Before schools opened in Rhode Island, we had around 70 cases a week among children, ages 5 to 18. 70 cases a week. We now have an average 800 cases a week in children, ages 5 to 18. But that is just the safety discussion. And I really, honestly, for the purposes of this discussion, we can posit that, you know what, when all of the research comes out, it will say that it's safe. I will posit that now, even though I do not think the research is actually showing that right now. I really would like to speak more about the education factor. It has been said numerous times, kids learn better in school, and that is just hands down kind of assumed. The reality is we're not talking about kids in school versus kids at home. We're talking about kids in high quality distance learning with live meets with their teachers and a consistent schedule, and kids in person during a pandemic when they sit in rows, when they have a teacher in front of them or an adult in front of them, because often the teacher may have to be absent and they'll have a substitute or coverage. And honestly, everything we've learned about education is this students in rows, no group work, very teacher-led. That's not good education. I look to Providence, which did open up their schools, elementary, and I believe middle and high school on a hybrid. On the attendance dashboard, 10 elementary schools exceed 50% chronic absenteeism. 5 elementary schools exceed 60% chronic absenteeism. Putting students into an environment and putting parents into the environment where their student is going to have to be chronically absent the majority of the time, that's not a good learning environment. So I do push back on the idea that it's just a better idea to have kids in class right now. I think that the unpredictability of skyrocketing COVID cases is quarantines and unpredictability in delivery. But there are concerns that have been raised. Childcare is a concern. Obviously, quarantines make that hard for parents anyway, but having some of the in-person might alleviate childcare concerns. Childcare concerns in our community, across the state, across this country, are not new. I wish our state had used this as an opportunity to say, we've exposed childcare concerns as a huge issue. Let's actually do something that has a lasting effect. Let's look to make more affordable and available childcare, because many of our parents, the 6 hours of school, we're not cutting it. They need it after school, before school, evenings. Affordable childcare is a problem that needs to be addressed, and we could be using this pandemic to look for ways to address that. There are students who are not thriving in the distance learning environment, and there are students who are struggling. I do not know what paradigm of education we are comparing this to. We have always had students who have struggled. It is our job to find ways to differentiate, to meet those needs. We need to listen to those parents. I believe her name was Shannon, who spoke up. We need to be in conversation with those parents and asking what we can do to help them out right now. I respectfully disagree with the superintendent's recommendation. If I were a committee of one right now, I would be recommending that we, as soon as possible, return our special populations to the classroom. As soon as we can get buses routed and get the students back in that were in the classroom before, the ones that already have established classrooms, we return them to the classroom. And I would be advocating, if I were a committee of one, that we do remote learning for the remainder of our students for the second semester. I think that the concerns are that if we put students back in the classroom now, we are going to change the schedule of over 50% of our students, at least. It may be closer to 75% will suddenly have a new teacher. That half that want remote learning, they don't just get to continue with remote learning as it's been. The impact of moving students back into the classroom affects the entire district. This isn't just as simple as, well, why don't we just put back the kids who want it and leave the other ones alone? Everyone is affected. Everyone is going to start over as if it's September, getting to know new routines. It usually takes, as an educator, I know, about 6 weeks. That's about half the time, once we get this all done, that we're going to have left of just getting to know new routines and having students build that relationship. I think that we should also instruct our superintendent, because I do not see the state taking the lead on childcare, to investigate what New York City, what Indianapolis has done to establish remote learning centers in our schools. There are different approaches to it, but it does alleviate the childcare needs for some parents. In addition, I would hope that if transmission rates do come down, as the vaccine hopefully is rolled out, that we bring back sports to give that social engagement, but we also bring back other after-school activities in a safe outdoor environment, prioritizing the education of our students. So, like I said, I just spoke a lot, and I'm looking forward to hearing what my colleagues think. I also want to say, I took that survey for my 2 children, and I said, if this committee decides to send back students in person, my kids will go. Because I really do trust that I do not have all the answers. I think that this is the hardest decision I've wrestled with. I know it's the hardest decision you all have wrestled with, and I respect everyone's view here. And if this majority of this committee really does see this as the right choice, I trust that Pawtucket can do it. I trust that we can find an education that will work. I do not think it is the right decision, but if this committee makes that decision, my children will go back in person, and that's how I completed that survey. So I thank you for going first here, and I do look forward to hearing other feedback from the committee.
Chairman Charbonneau?
Ms. Spinola, my apologies, I was muted.
Oh, okay. I figured if nobody else is going to talk. So I appreciate everything you said and everything you looked up, Erin. I do. But unfortunately, not all of our students have the ability to have the assistance at home that your kids do. And I'm not singling you out. There are other people that have the ability to help their children, but not all of them do. I do have a couple of questions. Dr. McWilliams, on the charts that you completed, did you differentiate which students were at health risk and would be staying home as far as the ones that wanted distance learning?
No, Chair, if I can answer that. No, we did not identify students with health risk. We certainly could have the special ed department, reach out and do that, but we did not identify students that way. No.
The other question I had as far as that grouping would be how the grades were of the students that are choosing to stay home. That's something else that I think should be looked at. If their grades are half of what they used to be, I think someone needs to have an in-person discussion with the family to see what we can do to assist them. If that's a reason they chose to stay home. Okay. Another question I have, and I have lots of different questions, is there an education recovery established to assist the students that have fallen behind?
Yes, we do have, and it should have already started right now, we do have funding for extended learning for content, credit, and ramp up recovery and assistance for students, yes.
Okay. At no charge to the families?
Correct, at no charge, yeah.
Okay. When we phase in the elementary schools, is there a reason why we're waiting on the secondary and the high schools? Just because our schools are empty, our students want to go back, or their families choose to go back. And that's something we do need to look at. Health risks aside, special needs aside, there are students that, it may sound wonderful that kids are doing great at home, but kids are facing weight gain, And it's not only kids. They're facing depression. They're facing anxiety. There are a lot of stresses being put on them while they're sitting at home with nobody to reach out to. And yes, there's a teacher online, but that's not a single one-on-one conversation. I do believe, as I have for a while, that students need to go back, if not all of them. Then a section on distance learning and a section in person. And I think that was all my questions for the moment.
Chair, Mr. Chair, could I just respond to that?
Superintendent, sure.
Yes. So to respond to that, I do understand what you're saying. However, when you look at the way it has been done across the state, it has been that gradual type of return, as it was mentioned, you know, even on the public participation. And I'm not saying that secondary is any less needy or less important. It's just when you think about the fact of what you need to do as far as not only the staffing, but the busing, you have to consider that too. So it makes, you know, it would be most appropriate to start with the youngest, most needy students and make sure that you have their busing and all that squared away. With that being said, you know, there still are those requirements on the busing. So you have to also think about the fact that maybe we don't, when secondary goes back, and particularly middle school, are we going to be able to bus them? So that would be something we have to first look at our youngest population and make sure that they're squared away as far as the busing, because again, you still have those COVID requirements and number of requirements of percent on buses. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Grant?
Thank you, Chairman Charbonneau. I want to thank Ms. Bonolo and Ms. Doobie. You know, I feel that you both bring some very important facts to the forefront or concerns. There's a lot to think about here. The first thing I just want to start off by saying is, in my home, the first thing we always say is safety first. If you don't have your health, what do you got? The second thing I have a question for the superintendent. Superintendent, these surveys, if a family got through and spoke to someone in the call center and started asking questions, and they were concerned and couldn't get answers to their questions. For example, well, I can't say if they're going back to school because is their teacher going to be their teacher? Something we wouldn't.
Ms. Grant has frozen on my end, as has her audio.
My end too, Jay.
All right, we'll give it a minute. Ms. Grant, I don't know if you can hear
Oh,
us.
I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? I apologize.
You're back.
How far did you hear me? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, if I could,
So my question was, you did hear my question? Okay.
yes.
I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could answer that. So I did, fortunately, I did hear it before you went frozen, but I believe your question was, you know, how was it documented when a parent calls that call center and whether they left a message and got a call back or they talked to someone on the phone and that parent said, you know, well, I'm still thinking about it. I'm not sure. I have this question or that question. I'm not sure about a schedule change. So it would be documented. If they did not want to give a response, we really did work very diligently. Our staff has worked to try to get a response, you know, from them, either one way or another. Like particularly, I know one particular parent that I actually talked to, and she said, well, I want to know this, I want to know that. And I said, we're just looking for your best, you know, estimate at this time because we need to plan. And she gave that to me. So we did our best to try to get that. When that was done, it would have been documented on a sheet which went into Skyward. So that's why when you looked at the survey responses, it said no response in Skyward, because we were all pushing that data into Skyward so that we knew exactly who had responded. But with that being said, you are correct. There also certain were those some parents that said, well, I'm not going to give an answer. And then again, it wouldn't have been recorded. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so it wouldn't have been recorded.
That
as-
they gave an answer, but it was recorded, documented that they called.
Right, but on the survey that you presented, would it have shown as basically as a parent who didn't respond, or would their number just not be included?
No, it would have been as a no response in Skyward, because what we did was we pushed all those responses into Skyward. And so so whether they called by and spoke to a person or left a message or were called back, a form was filled out to push that information to Skyward. So it would be a no response in Skyward.
Okay, all right.
Which is not that.
Okay. The other thing, I kind of want to piggyback, and I know Ms. Bonolo mentioned that there's no one-on-one. I believe that's incorrect, and I just want to ask you on that. There are breakout groups, correct? So they do have the capability on Zoom to break out and do a one-on-one with a child and work on their, especially in regards to a special needs child who might have IEP goals. So the special educator would break out into that group and work with that child one-on-one, correct?
Yes, I would like to answer that. Yes, so not only are you correct with special education, but also with the regular ed teachers. I have received emails from parents who have, applauding their teacher, saying, she came on later on in the afternoon and worked with her child one-on-one and who was struggling. So yes, those opportunities, breakout sessions for a small group and for one-on-one is happening.
Okay. Just just a couple of comments. Like I said earlier in the conversation, if you don't have your health, what do you have? A few parents and teachers had reached out, and I listened to their concerns, and they had shared some stories about how distance learning is going, and kind of I don't know, to basically quote the governor, but become creative. And I've heard some stories that I want to applaud our teaching staff. Concerts at Christmas time, virtually, traditional things that the students have traditionally done. I've seen and I have heard that these things have taken place. So, I think that's fabulous. I think the creativity is just fabulous. And, I'll be honest with you, right now, I'm still trying to take this all in and try to decide what my decision will be. But I think we have a responsibility as leaders in this community to, make sure our staff and students are safe. We also are to provide them an education. And I have always said, I believe consistency is very important. And I think the only way we can provide consistency is through distance learning. If we bring our children back to school, like Ms. Dubie said, it's like coming in September. parents don't know right now if who their child is going to have for a teacher or not. Some kids, especially our little ones, are going to be going to different schools because theirs were not opened. And Superintendent, please jump in if you can, but has the list changed for substitute teachers? Has the state jumped in to kind of comment or make more substitute teachers available to us?
So I would like to answer that. Back early on, we had heard that there was this wave of 1,000 substitutes that were going to get trained by the Highlander Institute, and we were all going to be given those substitutes. I have touched base with many of my colleagues in other districts. We have not seen those substitutes come to fruition. We do know that there was some training that took place. I know Mrs. Rabbit, my assistant superintendent, who's over HR, who handles all of the staffing and the substitutes, has contacted that institute personally on a regular basis, asking, please send us subs. At one point, we were given a couple of names. She tried reaching out to those people. It hasn't materialized. I'm not saying that it won't, but it hasn't to this point. And we haven't seen that at all or heard that it has materialized in other districts either.
Okay, so as the pods we know, or the pods that we were told that we would have at the beginning of the year, the school year, if the children return to school, probably wouldn't exist or don't exist if there is no teacher there, correct?
No, that is correct. That is, one of the challenges that we would have to overcome. And I did want to make note, you talked about consistency, because as you saw in the data of that type of a split, 55-45, district-wide, again, it's slightly different by grade. You're talking about if you're going to have parents and families that aren't going to send their students to school, then we really have to rework the classrooms. And you can't have a classroom with just one teacher and one student, right? So that means that who they thought they were going to have, it would be slightly different. We'd have to, rework that in order to make sure that we were providing both distance and in-person learning. So.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Mr. Knight and then Mr. Marino.
I don't have any students in our school system, as everyone knows, but I am also over 65. So I know what the danger is, and I have other health problems, as everyone knows from last year. So I know what the danger is to the parents who are older or the grandparents who are in the home. I think our most important deal is to keep our students and our families safe. Now, I know that they're talking about getting all these substitute teachers approved so they could teach under the current situation. Well, I personally know that they're approving people to fill in as teachers who have never worked in schools before. And I think that's a dangerous problem. And it also is something that's not good for our kids. And I just think it's time that we think of a way to get through this, especially now that we're getting a vaccine. And I hope everybody realizes how dangerous it is to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Mr. Marino.
Thank you, Chairman. So as everyone has said, that science is the thing that all of us use to help in these hard choices, and science shows that children are usually children are usually asymptomatic, and in our community, a few places are often old type family homes, and the COVID overall has disproportionately affected communities of color, and here in our city, the school facilities that need the highest work are the Slaters and are the Cunninghams, and the populations that we serve are often minorities, and I feel as if it would be a hot zone for community spread here. So I just had to express that. So and I'm also curious, have we heard anything about vaccines?
Superintendent?
So early on, we had thought that it was going to be a little bit sooner. We were hearing January, February for that phase 2. As late as today, there was some talk amongst the RISA organization in one of our meetings that there is a strong push from that organization, as well as, you know, the unions, to request that educators get put into the end of the priority 1 or phase 1 of the vaccine. So if that happens, I think we would be looking at end of February, beginning of March. Prior to that, it was looking like it would have been later. So we're hopeful that if that happens, we would be looking at a vaccine for our educators end of February, early March. But I don't know if we'll be in that phase or phase 2, which would be pushed out later.
Excellent.
Any other comment? Mr. Larby?
Mr. Chairman, and thank you everyone who has shared their thoughts today. Thank you, Dr. McWilliams, for your presentation and data.
Mr. Larby, excuse me, you're coming in a little soft on my end. I'm having a little problem hearing you.
My computer speaking.
There we go.
All right, sounds good. All right. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has shared their thoughts today. This is, as everyone has mentioned, an extremely hard decision and something that I've been wrestling with. And every single time we have come to a meeting and having made a choice, I spend the next few days wrestling with that choice on whether I made the right one. And I think, yeah, I'm extremely conflicted because I do agree with everybody that safety is first. We need to do everything we can to help stop community spread. And I'm not 100% sure, as Ms. Doobie has pointed out, that the data that we are receiving that shows that schools are not hotspots are telling us the whole truth or encompassing all the data that can come with that. But at the same time, I understand that there are many students who are struggling, many families who are struggling, and we have a community that has a lack of resources for those families for various reasons. So I'm still conflicted as I'm wrestling with this in my thoughts right now. One question I do have for you, Superintendent, is about state testing. As of right now, is state testing still required? And if so, what does that mean if we have students virtually compared to in person? And
Okay, so Chair, I'd like to answer that. Yes, at this time, we actually have the access testing, which is for our multilingual learners. That window opened up last week and it goes through to March 12th. If we are on distance learning and we are not in person, then those multilingual learners will need to be scheduled appointments to come in and take, it's about, for them, there's a good portion of it that's on the computer, so that won't be an issue. But the in-person speech part would have to be done in person, so that would have to be done by appointment, and that would have to be scheduled. As far as the RICAS state testing, as of today, the latest I've heard is that testing is still on track to take place. The window starts, I believe, right before, oh boy, I want to say it's like late March, and it goes through the first week in May with the makeup dates starting the following. So again, that would be for our grades 3 and up. If we are on distance learning, we would have to schedule to have those students come in. That's about a 2-hour test for ELA and a 2-hour for math. So we would have to coordinate to make sure that the students were scheduled to come in by appointment to take that, whether it's in very small pods. We'd have to, we would figure that out if we're on distance learning. We would definitely want to make sure we were a part of those assessments, and it's required. Unless, of course, it changes at the state, federal and state level for the RICAS testing. The access is still going right now, so we would need to be scheduling, depending on the outcome of this meeting, ASAP on those multilingual learners to get the access test.
okay, thank you. So the other question I have is, if we was to go into a partial return and say bring back our special populations, is there, say we limited our partial return to just special populations that we had agreed to do in the beginning of the year? Are there opportunities to do like a similar type of system for, and I can imagine secondary students needing something like this more so, a system in which students have the opportunity to potentially file an appointment, make an appointment to come into the school to receive extra support with anything that they may be struggling, anything of the sort to kind of really bridge the gap between some of the students who are really struggling. Also, I know Ms. Doobie mentioned something about New York having some resources for their families inside their school districts, in which potentially there is a smaller part of students who families just really don't have the resources to keep them at home. If we could also explore those type of options.
Okay, I'd like to answer that. Yes. So first of all, I wanted to make a note that when you say special populations, when we brought back in the beginning, it was pre-KK, special populations, and multilingual learners. So special populations would be those students who are in a specialized class. So we certainly could have them return in those specialized classrooms. As far as the multilingual learners, that would be a shift in schedules and teachers, because those students were made up of all different schools from all different, even grade levels. So So that would be something to have to work out and consider as far as staffing. As far as consideration of what we could do with the high school students or those who express that need, that special need, again, that would be something that we certainly could investigate and look into, keeping in mind that if you're going to be on distance learning, the teachers are going to be during the school hours on a schedule with their students. So that would be a scheduled, after school hours. That would be something that we could be scheduling after school hours, which, by the way, I will say that whether we're in school in person or not, it's something that we always do. So it's what we call content in credit recovery and ramp up and after school work, which we have, budgeted in our grants for that. So that is something that we could do, but it would have to be after the school hours. And I think it was also mentioned, also participating in those sporting, in those smaller group types of things, which we would want to do as well. And then I believe you also referred to something that Mrs. Dubey referred to, which was looking at ways in which we could, in all grade levels, or I think particularly elementary, where you had those students that needed to be doing, almost like doing distance learning in a school building. So that's certainly something that I can look into. I think she mentioned a few different communities where that's happening. Just have to keep in mind that if we're on distance learning, all of our teachers are on a schedule in a classroom. So we'd have to be looking at who would be manning that room in those, like say you had a room in every single elementary school that was going to house distance learning students who needed to be in person to be supervised. You'd need someone to supervise that. So you have to think about that, and I'd want to also get legal's weigh in on that. I also will mention that even at the point of where we have been from September 14th on, we have had some of our students who have participated in those community organizations, such as the Boys and Girls Clubs, the YMCA, the Doctor Daycare. There's a handful of them that have housed our students who were on distance learning, but who needed that supervision. And our curriculum department, I know this for a fact because our curriculum department has been fantastic in reaching out to those organizations to make sure that they had what they needed in understanding our curriculum, so that they could help assist those students if and as needed. So yes, I hope that answers all your questions.
Yeah. Thank you, I appreciate it.
All right, anyone else? I do have a couple of comments, and I will be brief. I thank you all for the discussion and the value you added to my thought process. And I just want to start off by saying that it's important when we have these conversations that we all remember that our kids are watching. Our kids are watching, and our kids are listening to us. They're watching how we treat each other and the discourse we engage in. And when an issue this important becomes clouded with references to old data, or to Ms. Dubey's point, some surveys, but we leave out some information at the end, it doesn't advance anything. It certainly doesn't advance the discussion, and it doesn't advance getting the students of the Pawtucket School District back in school. And I hope everybody takes a moment to recognize that this is and has been an agonizing decision for this committee over the period of several months. And, I referenced the other day in a conversation that the 7 of us don't do politics for a living. We're members of the community who decided that maybe we had a skill set that we could add value to the city and the municipality we live in. That's why I got involved, and I think that's why you all got involved. And so I bring that same spirit to this discussion. And I get and I respect that there are differing views on this matter. And I get people who say the kids will do better and should be back in school. I understand that. I hear that. But I also hear the people who say, I don't feel safe going back to school, and I'm not sending my child back to school. And you have to take both sides and see what it does to the greater good, to the greater unit that is the Pawtucket School Department. And I believe that keeping our children safe is our paramount concern. And I also believe, for the record, that we have an obligation to keep the over 1,000 men and women who make up the workforce of the Pawtucket School Department. We have to provide them a safe working environment as well. And I'm not afraid to say that or ashamed to say that. They are our partners. They have worked with us. They are part of this team, and they are assisting us as we try to advance the educational experience for every student in this district. So to say that we throw in the towel or we don't care or we're just not doing it is not right. It's not accurate, and it doesn't represent the work that this committee's done. Ms. Doobie, I trust your opinion. I value the way you research, and if you make that motion, Ms. Doobie, I would support that motion. I would support the motion because I believe that doing that provides the best educational delivery for the students of the Pawtucket School Department, far better than putting them back in school for a week or two to say that we did it and pull them out and then put them back and pull them out, or have them go to school without a teacher in front of them and have them split classes. Beyond our providing a safe environment, it's our charge to educate these children the best way we know how. And I believe the best way to do it under these circumstances is consistency. Pawtucket is a resilient community. Our families have figured it out. They've worked together. They've partnered within their own neighborhoods and their own communities to figure it out. And I believe at the end of the day, we are all going to be held accountable for the results of this. And so I make the decision because I think it gives us the best chance to be successful. It gives our students the best chance to be successful. So I don't know where the committee is at, but if somebody wants to make a motion relative to the topic, Ms. Doobie.
I move that we return our special populations, including our MLLs. If that requires repopulating classes, we return our 25% of the population that was in school before to in-person as soon as the superintendent can get buses routed.
Second.
I'm sorry, I haven't finished, and the superintendent has a clarification question.
I was just wondering, are you saying pre-K, special populations and multilingual learners?
Yes.
Okay.
I move that we return our PKK and special populations to the classroom. I move also that we have our grades 1 through 12 on remote learning for the second semester of the school year.
There's a motion on the floor made by Ms. Doobie that we return the
Second.
population as soon as the superintendent logistically can make it happen, and that our grades 1 through 12 remain on remote learning for the second semester. That motion's been seconded by Mr. Knight. Discussion on the motion. Ms. Spinolo.
Okay, when does the second semester end?
In my mind, this is the rest of the school year, Ms. Bonello. Sorry.
Oh, semester, half a year. No way to consider bringing in the first and second grade with that?
Ms. Doobie.
For me personally, I mean, if the motion failed, I think another motion can be made. those numbers, just all of our first graders on remote learning who decide to stay on remote learning are going to, most of them are going to end up with new teachers. Many of them are going to get shuffled with other schools into a virtual academy. Those numbers show that that's almost 50%. And of the ones that do return to school, even in grades 1 and 2, they're going to often be encountering new teachers. Some of them may not be able to attend their home schools because we can't make a full class at their home school. I see any schedule changes at this point only to return students to a non-consistent environment, to be not in the best interest of our students. And I would like to follow this. I will follow this up with a motion to direct our superintendent to research remote learning centers if this passes or if this doesn't pass. But I think we owe it to our parents, to our teachers, to give them an understanding of what the rest of this school year looks like. Not what the next month looks like, not what the next 6 weeks look like. I think we owe it to them to be able to say, this is what we're doing. This is what you can plan for. And let's work together to make it the best experience for you and for your students. And I know that parents are frustrated with the continued punting. And I know that maybe in May or in April, things start looking really great, but we just need to give a consistent environment to our students. And yes, it's been frequently said that Pawtucket is the only district in the state that is doing this. I'd like to remind the state that there is a charter school in Central Falls that has been 100% remote since the beginning. They haven't been a punching bag. Their charter hasn't been threatened to be revoked. They've been able to just make the best decisions for their students outside of this kind of political lens. And their students are doing well. I'd also like to say that almost 50% of the students in this country are in remote learning right now. I think we owe it to our families to give consistency and a plan for what we're going to do for the rest of the year.
Ms. Spinello.
Okay, to continue the conversation, can someone clarify what a learning center would be? Who would be involved in it? Erin, Dr. McWilliams?
So I reached out to the superintendent after looking at what New York City has done, also what Boston has done, what Brockton has done. What they've done is they've looked at ways to bring students into the classroom in remote learning. So they're still working with their teacher. They'll have headphones on. And because we don't have to worry about having it match up with an actual teacher, we can use big spaces. We can use gyms and spread out students so they're 12 feet between each other. And really you're bringing them into a supervised environment with Wi-Fi. Some districts have worked with the Boys and Girls Club and used funding to bring in people. Other districts have found that they have staffing where they have TAs or other staff in the building who can serve in this purpose, or have looked to bring in substitutes. There's an adult in the classroom who can help a child if they have a question, but their teacher is still the person on the computer. So this is really for those parents who really need a childcare option, because it's not going to be that there's a classroom environment happening, but it is a childcare option. And to speak to Mr. Larby's point, in some schools at a high school level, this has happened more as a place that students can go. And because it's not really a childcare option, just a place that they can go and feel safe and work on their computer. As in, they might be able to have 5 students work in the library. So I don't know what it would look like in Pawtucket, but I do know that if we can make a decision on what we're actually going to do for the rest of the year, we can then look to maximize how to do it right and with the best interest. I fully believe we can provide the education. I think we are doing an excellent job of that right now. But there are other needs that, quite frankly, I wish the state were addressing. And that is, I wish the state were looking at sustainable changes to the childcare system, paying people better wages so that they actually want to go into childcare. That's another concern. But if with the void coming from anyone doing something from that part, we could try to do things as other districts have.
All right, any further discussion on the motion? Motion on the floor that's been seconded.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Knight,
sorry, I'm having trouble with my phone right now. My computer died. Now my phone's about to. What we decide tonight is what we have to do for our students because it's what's right for our students. I believe Ms. Doobie has done a lot of research, more than I have, and I think I lost you.
we can hear you, Mr. Knight.
Okay. I've done some. I've listened, and I believe that Ms. Doobie has the best idea that we've come up with so far. And, you know, we're going to take shots from the politicians in the State House, but let's remember one thing. Gene is going to Washington.
All right, Mr. Knight, I asked that we refrain from that kind of dialogue, but any other discussion on this? Ms. Bonolo?
Ms. Doobie, would you consider amending your motion to include learning centers to be established for our students?
I will make a motion after this to do that. I don't know if people want to vote on both at the same time. I feel like people might want to go on the record on one.
Yeah, let's take the motion that's on the floor and been seconded. If there's any other discussion on the return of the pre-K, the K, the special population, as soon as operationally feasible by the superintendent with the grades 1 through 12 remaining on remote learning for the second semester. Any other discussion on that motion that's been made and seconded? Roll call on the motion, please.
Ms. Bonolo,
Yes.
Ms. Doobie,
Yes.
Ms. Grant,
Yes.
Mr. Knight,
Yes.
Mr. Larby,
Yes.
Mr. Marino,
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Yes. All right, Ms. Doobie.
I move that we direct our superintendent to explore and present to this committee options for opening remote learning centers in our schools.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Doobie, the Superintendent McWilliams explore and then report back to the committee the options of opening learning centers in our schools. That's been seconded by Mr. Marino and Ms. Grant. Discussion on the learning center. Roll call on the approval, please.
Ms. Bonolo,
Yes.
Ms. Doobie,
Yes.
Ms. Grant,
Yes.
Mr. Knight,
Yes.
Mr. Larby,
Yes.
Mr. Marino,
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau.
Yes. All right. We are moving on to, before we move on to new business, we have been online since about 5 o'clock for the facilities meeting. So I would say that we will we will adjourn for 10 minutes. It is 8:21, 8:31, we will reconvene in public session. We will stand in recess until then.
Seconded.
All right, it is 8:33 and we are reconvening. We're moving along to new business, the Taft Community Garden.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to table.
Second.
Motion to table Taft Community Garden by Ms. Grant, seconded by Mr. Marino. Roll call on the table, please.
Ms. Bonolo,
Yes.
Ms. Doobie,
Yes.
Ms. Grant,
Yes.
Mr. Knight,
Yes.
Mr. Larby,
Yes.
Marino,
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau,
Yes. PPE compliance and availability, Ms. Grant?
So I asked Chairman Charbonneau if you would place this on the agenda this evening. Last meeting, during participation, we had a member of the staff talk about concerns and safety and things like that. So I actually reached out to the superintendent after the meeting, and I wanted to make sure that we were in compliant, or our staff, our school buildings, were in compliant with PPE regulations. So what I would like to do is, just see if the superintendent, since we had spoken, if you could share maybe what our process is, and who is responsible for these processes within the buildings.
Yes, absolutely, Chair. I'd like to answer that. So PPE is, when you consider PPE, you are talking about specifically for the general population, whether it's staff and students, whenever they're in close proximity of anybody, they should be wearing a mask. When you get into the more detailed, when you talk about nurses or service providers, those who are in close proximity working with students, they may be working hand on hand, especially if you're talking about OT and PT services. So when you talk about PPE for them, you are talking about layers of protection that are absolutely necessary, and those would include masks, but what we would call the paper surgical mask, and additional barriers, which would be either goggles or the shield, and gloves if they're using their hands and working with students or individuals, and also if they're working with students who might have exhibits of bodily fluids, they would want to be wearing the gowns. So all of those things have been present in our buildings. However, I will say, upon investigating after that last meeting, like Ms. Grant said, and after my conversation with her, I did some asking of questions of the principals, who are, by the way, the gatekeepers. So the principals of each building, particularly now that we are obviously in site-based management, it's the principal's job to be the gatekeeper, to be the ones that are responsible, for what goes on in their buildings, and to be watching out for staff and students. And so what I did learn was that many of us, and I don't have mine close by because I'm not with anybody in my room, but many of us, when the whole mask wearing became critical, we went out and bought these special cloth masks, and we have all these fancy masks that many of us wear. However, when you are talking about students working in close proximity, so that would be your nurses and your service providers, those cloth masks are not the appropriate barrier, and I did follow up and get information from medical providers on this. And it is critical that service providers, or anyone that's working in close proximity with another person, or in our case, children and students, that they wear I call the blue, because that's the ones that we have, the blue surgical mask, and that is the first line of defense for those working in close proximity. So if you're an OT, you're a service provider, you're adaptive physical ed teacher, you're a nurse, that you should be wearing that type of mask as your first line of defense. And obviously, if you're a teacher that was working one-on-one with a student, the same thing, a special educator, anybody that's going to be working close. So you have these barriers of protection. It's for the individual wearing it, but it's also for the individual that you're working with. So what I did learn was many of our staff were wearing the cloth mask. So we wanted to ensure, and a message was sent to the staff and to the principals to be a careful watch on this, to make sure that, yes, if you want to wear your nice, I don't know, scripted cloth mask, it has to have a surgical mask over it. You have to have that layer of protection, because those are made specifically, which is why if we all go to the doctors or we go to the dentist or we go to the hospital, we see that's what they're wearing. So, so in answer to your question, that message was sent loud and clear. There's an accountability for it. The principals are responsible. And not only that, we made it clear that we wanted to make sure that we had an abundance of PPE, which we do have. In not knowing where the committee was going to stand tonight, I had facilities, John Cody, thank you, he's always right there, right on the ball, ordering even extra. So just to make sure that we had an enormous amount of inventory of all these things, and that schools had them. He's made sure that every individual school has them. They have a spot and a place where they're held and inventoried. And additionally, he sent boxes specifically for those who work one-on-one, close proximity, OTs, PTs, nurses. He sent specifically to make sure that they had their own little care package. So yes, I hope that answers your questions, or I'd be happy to elaborate more if you need.
Superintendent, I do have a follow-up question to that. You know, a lot of our service providers don't normally stick to one school. So when we came up with you know, after we spoke and when you kind of worked out on a process for this, because, you know, going forward, we do want to make sure, you know, especially it's very important, you know, the concern for the safety of the students and the safety of our staff, and seeing how much COVID and, you know, what could be the case coming up. How are we handling staff that travel from school to school? So if I was OT and I went to Potters, or if I went to Varia, is each of those schools going to provide me what I need to wear when I enter that school?
Yes,
Not
absolutely. And we do have, yes, and we do have, unfortunately, we don't have an OT to PT for every single school. So you're right. We're trying to limit them. And now with the decision tonight, we're going to, you know, look at that even more closely and make sure that we limit as much as we possibly can. But with that being said, that not only will there be inventory for anyone who is physically in that building, there'll be also that continual of a sign in and an awareness of who is in the building and who's working with what students. So in order to, you know, make sure that we have an appropriate knowledge of who is in the building and who is working with the students.
Okay, so I'm thinking, you know, we have, you know, this particular protocol and process in place in all the schools, and they have it written, posted, and all staff is aware of it.
Yeah.
And going forward, they would.
The message was sent loud and clear. It went out to the staff. It went out to the principals to follow up. And I can certainly, you know, again, every time we have meetings, we'll reiterate that to make sure that it's solid.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you sharing your follow-up with it. Thank you.
I apologize, I was muted again. There is no action to be taken by the committee on this issue, but does anyone else want to weigh in? Any other discussion on this? All right, we will go to, actually, we're going to pass on the SLAM update. We all received that update. Again, it was an item that requires no committee action on. We received that update earlier this evening in the Facilities Committee. I had put it on here as a placeholder, so we are good with, unless there's an objection from anyone on the committee, with passing on the SLAM update. Any objection? Without one, we'll move on. Winters Elementary School PLA review and approval. I would turn it over to Attorney Dylan Conley to walk us through the PLA. Attorney Conley?
I think he ran away from home. Oh, there he is.
I apologize. Mr. Chairman, I take it that we're at the PLA section of the agenda?
We are. Feel free to get logged back in. I know it's been a late evening, and but I appreciate you hanging around to walk us through this portion of it.
Of course. If I can share my screen, I can do another walkthrough similar to what I did in the subcommittee meeting. Unfortunately, I don't have the full presentation regarding the student participation. My expert that was going to give that presentation couldn't stay on this late, so I can touch upon it. But he's happy to make that presentation whenever is convenient for the school board.
Dylan, you're all set. You can present.
Thank you so much. So for everyone that's been following this portion of the Henry Winters project, we did a PLA study. The PLA study came to the conclusion that we had combined concerns regarding how the RIDE Department of Education deadlines and the fact that we can lose grant refunds if we don't comply with their time frame, and how that overlaps with large-scale construction projects. This particular site being in the urban core, that there's only one access point, that a lot of off-site work was going to be done. So even a small disagreement of a subcontractor could derail the entire project. And then you add on to that the challenges of COVID-19, the ever-changing safety requirements, the ever-changing regulations on how contact tracing should work, how we need to focus on how people are safe in the workplace. And you put all that together and you're at a risk of loss, which is really high. So while we came to the conclusion that we should have a project labor agreement, this is the manifestation of that. Project labor agreements within the state of Rhode Island are relied upon somewhat frequently. They're relied upon in other school projects throughout the state. One of the things that, based on the advice and contributions of the subcommittee and this board at the project labor study portion, we've added some things to how the project labor agreement functions, which I think everyone will be very happy with and very proud of. Namely, we do immediately bring a lot of focus to the COVID-19 issues and to the Rhode Island Department of Education standards. Beyond that, we have specific language that focuses on giving involvement opportunities for female-owned businesses, women contractors, minority-owned businesses, minority contractors. And the chairman brought to our attention the possibility of having the school and children from the school and school groups themselves have career opportunities. I spoke with the union about that. They embraced it wholeheartedly. Gilbane, the primary contractor, also embraced it wholeheartedly. So as a portion of the project labor agreement, we'll have a program which reaches directly out to the Pawtucket community and creates apprenticeship program opportunities for veterans, for people within the city, for people within urban backgrounds, urban densities. There's target demographics that these programs search for. This program is called Building RI Futures, and they've had some success in the past, and they've really kind of been perfecting it, in particular, the relationship with a project labor agreement and Gilbane as the contractor. If I can just scroll you through this relatively quickly. I know it's been a long night, and we've already dealt with this to a degree at the subcommittee. This section of the agreement just recognizes the fact that this is a union agreement. There'll be 17 distinct unions that will be subject to this agreement. All of their collective bargaining agreements are individually referred to as effectively subcontracts underneath this agreement. The critical component there is the contractor, which will be Gilbane on behalf of the owner, which is the school district, will be managing the entire build out, which includes all 17 collective bargaining agreements. But because each of those unions are signing on to this PLA, it streamlines the processes. The largest benefit we get from this, from the ownership standpoint, and again, I can't underscore how much of a factor this is given the overlap of COVID-19 and ride performance deadlines, is no matter what happens, there will be no work stoppage. No matter what disputes may happen, no matter what grievances may occur, the work will go forward. So the trade-off that we have is we guarantee that we will rely on union labor, and union labor guarantees that there won't be any work stoppages. If there are problems, we have a really in-depth program for exactly how the process will work. How many days after notification, how many calendar days versus business days, how many hours from notification until something needs to be resolved. And that should keep everything moving forward. But again, the whole key component is even if there is a problem, work keeps going forward. So all disputes and grievances will be adjudicated efficiently underneath this agreement. We don't have to break it down amongst the 17 agreements, but they'll all be adjudicated without a stoppage. One of the other key components of moving things forward is we have a predetermined arbitrator. So we don't have to go through the arbitrator selection process. That in and of itself can take weeks on a normal issue. Because we have this PLA, we know who we're reaching out to. It's just a quick scheduling matter. The wages and benefits sections of these items, this is where we all have these call outs to making sure that it's fair compensation, that we're complying with state laws, that we're complying with the union's expectations on how things are going to work, including language like hours of work and holidays. If you have 17 collective bargaining agreements, you'll have 17 different definitions of what is an hour of work and how to change them in different holidays. What the PLA does is it solves that for us. Every union agrees to this language, so there's no ambiguity. The general work and health conditions, again, one of the things that we've done that no other PLA has done is it has rolled in the COVID-19 regulations and updates. I think that's really essential. This is the program that we will give a much fuller presentation at a later date, where the basically what we have is an opportunity for not only to get a new school, but for the community to benefit from that scale of work being done around them. It's a $50 million project. The amount of different trades that are active, the amount of skills necessary to build a school like this are enormous. So we have apprenticeship programs, but not limited to apprenticeship programs. It allows flexibility. And again, we're focusing on demographics that historically have not had equal access to the trades. I know that's something that was important to this community, to this school board. Here is our list of all of the unions that are subject to the project labor agreement. Each of these items is a call out to their specific and currently enforceable collective bargaining agreement. Gilbane's comfortable with that. So one of the other benefits we have is even though we are the owner, we aren't the entity that has to enforce this on a day-to-day. The primary contractor, Gilbane, has to enforce this on the day-to-day. I'm also doing all of the contractual work directly between the schools, the school district, the city, and Gilbane itself. All of those contractual works make reference to this PLA, so everything is woven together and really maintains maximum authority for the school district while limiting the amount of work the school district needs to do. It's really reliant on the primary contractor. If there are any grievances or disputes, school district is still a party. We'll be directly involved with trying to resolve all of those, see if we can jumpstart any problems or resolve anything a little expeditiously. This memorandum of understanding here is the document that each of the unions will sign on as they become a portion of the PLA. It includes the Building Futures program, which I mentioned. And this is also the contractor letter of assent, which is the document that any subcontractors need to sign in order to become a portion of the project. So there is no aspect of the project that isn't already considered and addressed within this PLA. And that makes it a relatively predictable and stable environment to do a project of this scale. I'd be very happy to answer any questions. And I do know the union is very excited to give the presentation regarding their Building Futures program. I apologize that we weren't able to do it this evening.
All right, thank you, Attorney Conley. Hirsch, can you remove the screen so I can see who's out there? All right, at this point, I'd entertain a motion to approve the Winters Elementary School PLA.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Marino, Mr. Knight, to approve the Winters Elementary School PLA.
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Bonomo. Discussion. Ms. Doobie.
I would just like to ask that we can get that presentation at the last meeting. I at the next meeting. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Knight.
Mr. Chairman, can that presentation be provided as a recording, or does the individual have to be here?
So I've worked with Andrew a bit on how we wanted to set up the presentation. He can either do a recording with PowerPoint if you want. He's also very happy to present and take questions, do Q&A. He has a lot of examples of historic successes, which I found to be particularly interesting. And we did kind of take it a step further in our PLA than what we've done historically. And that's something that I know both he and I were excited about.
Knight.
Thank you, Dylan. You've done a great job on this, and thank you, Mr. Conley, for allowing your son to be our PLA guy.
All right, and I would just make one comment. It is, it is important to this committee. It is important to me that we provide for those opportunities for the MB, WB, and I want to commend Attorney Conley for the work that went into this. And he reached out, he listened to the committee, and then he went to work and advocated on our behalf. And I'm excited about bringing RISA in the Rhode Island Student Advocate Group to work in conjunction with our Gilbane and our partners to provide this really a unique opportunity for our students within the city to incorporate a school building with potential apprenticeships and trade. So I'm excited about partnering with the union overall and how they're going to incorporate our students into this project. So again, Attorney Conley, thank you very much. Well done. There's a motion to approve. It's been seconded. No further discussion. Roll call on the approval, please.
Ms. Bonolo?
Yes.
Ms. Doobie?
Yes.
Ms. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Knight?
Yes.
Mr. Larby?
Yes.
Mr. Marino?
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau?
Yes. All right, moving along. Annex Campus Swing Space Project. As we had previously in the facilities meeting, there was a motion to table this item. It was tabled in the facilities meeting.
Motion to table.
Second.
Motion to table the Annex Campus Swing Space Project by Mr. Knight, seconded by Ms. Doobie.
Second.
Ms. Grant.
Yep.
Roll call on the table, please.
Ms. Bonolo?
Yes.
Ms. Doobie?
Yes.
Ms. Grant?
Yes.
Mr. Knight? Mr. Knight?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Larby?
Yes.
Mr. Marino?
Yes.
Mr. Charbonneau?
Yes. All right, we will move along to discussion items as we normally do. It's an open floor for any monthly vendor report, the OT or the maintenance. Does anyone have anything on the discussion item? Twice. All right, we will move to superintendent's update.
All right, thank you, everyone. I just want to state that we will be working, hitting the ground first thing tomorrow, meeting with my team to make sure that we work diligently to get our pre-KK and multilingual learners and special populations back in school. As soon as we can get buses routed, we will continue with the high quality distance learning and improve upon it with enhancements as much as we possibly can, and pursue that remote learning opportunity. So we have a lot of work in front of us. I thank you all for your leadership, and we will do the best for our students and our families in Pawtucket.
Thank you, Superintendent. Ms. Spinola. We're on school committee updates. My apologies. Ms. Spinola.
Good night and Happy New Year.
Mr. Marino.
Yes, I just want to be brief and say how proud I am of the school community throughout our city. Thank you. Good night.
Ms. Grant.
First of all, I want to thank the superintendent for gathering all that information tonight for us to make our decision. You know, tonight wasn't an easy decision. Either way, I do think it's best that, we just keep safety as our top priority. And then, we can try to add some things in. I hope everyone had a nice holiday season, and good night.
Mr. Lobby.
I want to wish everybody a happy new year, and once again, special thanks to all the teachers who work extremely hard, administrators, our families, and our students. Thank you all for everything that you're doing to ensure that we stay safe and keep moving.
Mr. Knight.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Ms. Doobie.
Thank you, everyone. I think now definitely, as Dr. McWilliams said in her remarks, the work now turns to making sure that we are providing the best education to the students in Pawtucket, and that we are listening to the needs of the parents who said that they wanted their students to return, to find out what we need to do to meet their needs. And so I trust the superintendent will do that, and we'll be responsive to the teachers and the parents and do what Pawtucket does best, which is work as a team.
Thank you, Ms. Doobie, and thank all of you. I want to close by saying it's not all doom and gloom, and it's not all fighting and disagreeing publicly. I have been strengthened by the calls, the texts, the emails I've gotten from members of this community in their support of this school committee. So while at times it feels like we're out there on an island by ourselves, we're not. And I also think we have an opportunity here to kind of change the conversation a little bit. And the fact that we disagree on one issue should not make us enemies. And it shouldn't divide us so much so that we lose sight of the fact that we're all charged with doing the best we can for the kids that we represent. The same electorate that elected all the other state and city officials elected us as well. We all have an obligation to do what we think is in the best interest of those constituents, and in our case, it's the students that we represent. And as always, I am incredibly proud to be a part of this committee and a part of this team. I thank you all very much. At this point, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Excuse me, Chair. If I could just make a suggestion, if we could just adjourn in the memory of the superintendent's sister, Gladys Beerley. I'd really appreciate it if everyone could just take a moment. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
There's a motion to adjourn. It's been seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.